The palace was unlike anything the human had ever seen. Towering spires of strange metal, glowing softly in the dark, stretched toward the sky. The walls were lined with smooth, shimmering surfaces, not a crack or imperfection to be found. Massive. Windows offered views of the alien world outside, where forests and rivers seemed to pulse with a life of their own. It was a place of unimaginable power, and the human was just a small speck within it. Assigned as a servant in this vast palace, the human felt out of place. The Queen's palace was the heart of an empire that spanned entire star systems, a place of political intrigue, luxury, and danger. The Queen herself, an alien woman of immense beauty and power, was rumored to control armies and fleets that could crush entire planets. Yet to the Queen, the human was nothing more than another servant, a lowly creature from a distant, insignificant world. To her, humans were weak, primitive beings, barely worth her attention. The human, however, knew better. Though they were assigned the most menial of tasks, cleaning the halls, polishing the Queen's personal artifacts, and serving her guests, they kept their eyes open. They knew they had been sent to this palace not by chance, but for a reason. Earth was a small world, barely on the map of galactic powers, but the human had been chosen for something far greater. They had skills that no one in the palace had. As the days passed, the human learned the ins and outs of the palace. They discovered secret corridors and hidden chambers, places where the Queen's enemies could plot without fear of being overheard. The human also noticed something else, a growing sense of unease. There were whispers in the corridors, secret, conversations held in the shadows, and nervous glances exchanged between high-ranking officials. Something was brewing in the palace, and it had nothing to do with the Queen's well-being. The human had heard rumors from the other servants, talk of a growing rebellion among the Queen's most trusted advisors. They were planning something that could bring down the Queen herself. But what? The human didn't know yet, but they would find out. They were determined to do so. One day, as they polished a set of ancient artifacts in the Queen's private chambers, the human overheard something. The Queen was speaking to one of her advisors, her voice cold and commanding. The words that reached the human's ears were nothing short of alarming. The advisor spoke of alliances, hidden factions, and plans to take control of the galaxy. It was clear that the Queen was unaware of the scale of the betrayal happening right under her nose. The human knew they had to act, but they also knew they couldn't do it alone. They had no allies in this palace, only enemies who would be more than happy to see them fail. Yet the human wasn't afraid. They had lived through worse. Earth wasn't a peaceful place. The human had grown up in a world where survival was the first lesson. They had learned how to think quickly, how to outsmart those who underestimated them. And now, they would use everything they knew to uncover the truth and, if necessary, save the Queen. But how? The human couldn't just march up to the Queen and tell her everything. She wouldn't believe them. Earthlings were seen as weak, barely capable of anything beyond manual labor. The human's status as a servant didn't help. They needed to gather information to find out who was involved in the conspiracy and to learn what their enemies were planning. They would have to be subtle, careful, and most of all, patient. The next day, the humans' opportunity came. They were asked to deliver a message to one of the Queen's most trusted generals, a woman known for her fierce loyalty. The human knew that the general was also one of the Queen's closest allies, someone who might know more about the palace's secrets than anyone else. The message, however, was just an excuse. The real reason the human had been sent was to listen, to watch, and to gather information. As they walked through the halls of the palace, the human kept their ears sharp, their eyes open for anything that could be useful. They passed by guards, who barely noticed them, by servants who were too busy with their own duties to pay attention. It was then that the human noticed something strange. A figure in a dark cloak was standing at the end of the hallway watching them. The human froze for a moment, their heart racing. Was it an enemy? A spy sent to track them? The figure remained still, unmoving, until the human passed by. It was. Then that they noticed the subtle glint of a blade hidden beneath the cloak, a weapon that was not supposed to be in the hands of any servant. Whoever this person was, they weren't supposed to be there. The human quickened their pace, their mind racing. Had they been discovered? Was this person watching them for a reason? But before they could think more on it, they reached the general's chambers. They knocked, and the door was opened by one of the queen's most trusted aides. The human passed the message, trying to act Kazuth. The alien political system was ruthless, and there were no second chances for traitors, no mercy for those who stood in the way of power. The human had learned that much quickly, but they also knew they had something the conspirators didn't: knowledge. They were from Earth, a planet that was overlooked by the galaxy's powerful civilizations. But Earth was a world filled with survivors, with people who had learned to think on their feet. The human was determined to use that knowledge to their advantage. One evening, as the human was cleaning the corridors near the Queen's private chambers, they overheard a conversation between two of the Queen's most trusted advisors. The human paused, hiding behind a column, trying not to make a sound. The voices were hushed but sharp, filled with urgency. "We need to act quickly," one advisor said. "The Queen is too weak. If we wait any longer, someone else will take control." The other advisor replied, "She has no idea how much danger she's in. We've manipulated her into thinking she's in control, but it's us pulling the strings. Now. The time is coming." The human's heart pounded in their chest. These were the words they had feared, the confirmation that the Queen was in grave danger. But what was this other faction they were talking about? Who was it that was poised to take control? As the advisors continued their conversation, the human's mind raced. They had to find out more, but they couldn't risk being caught eavesdropping. They quietly retreated, pretending to focus on their task, but their thoughts were elsewhere. This was bigger than anything they had imagined. They had to learn more. The next day, the human was assigned to serve a banquet for the Queen's guests. A group of high-ranking officers and diplomats from across the galaxy. The guests were powerful, influential, and dangerous. It was a perfect opportunity to gather more information. The human had learned to blend into the background, to go unnoticed by the wealthy and powerful. And today, they would use that skill to their advantage. The banquet hall was grand, filled with extravagant decorations and delicacies from all corners of the galaxy. The human moved silently through the crowd, delivering food and drinks, pretending to be just another servant. But their eyes were sharp, scanning the room for anyone who might have knowledge of the conspiracy. Then, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Across the room, standing in the shadows, was the cloaked figure they had seen before, the one who had been watching them. The figure was speaking with a group of well-dressed individuals, people who appeared to be high-ranking, officials. The human couldn't hear the conversation, but the sight alone was enough to raise alarms. The figure had to be involved in the conspiracy. But who were they working with? And more importantly, what were they planning? The human's thoughts were interrupted when one of the Queen's advisors approached them. The advisor's cold eyes studied the human as if sensing something was wrong. "You there," the advisor said, voice low and commanding. "You're not just cleaning today. You'll be delivering a message to the general in the West Wing." The human's heart skipped a beat. The West Wing was off limits to most people. The general was one of the Queen's most trusted commanders, but the human knew there was something strange about the general's behavior recently. Could this be another clue in the puzzle? The advisor's sharp gaze lingered for a moment before he nodded. "You may go." The human moved quickly, their mind racing. The West Wing would be the perfect place to uncover more about the conspiracy, but they had to be careful. If the wrong person found out what they were doing, it would all be over. As they entered the West Wing, the humans' footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. The silence was eerie, and the walls felt like they were closing in. They finally reached the general's chambers and knocked on the door. The general opened it herself, her eyes scanning the human with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Your message?" the general asked, stepping aside to let the human in. The human handed over the sealed envelope, but their mind was elsewhere. The general had been acting strangely ever since they arrived. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but something was off about her. As the general opened the letter, the human noticed something. The same cloaked figure from the banquet. Hall was now standing just outside the general's office, watching them. The human's insti. NCTs screamed at them to flee, but they knew they couldn't. Not yet. The general turned to face them, her face unreadable. "Stay here," she ordered. The human stood still, heart racing. They had no idea what would happen next, but they had. A feeling it was only a matter of time before they were pulled deeper into the dangerous game that was unfolding around them. The human's mind raced as they stood in the general's office, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The general had asked them to stay, but the human could feel that something was wrong. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, the silence between them growing heavy with unspoken tension. The cloaked figure was still just outside, watching them, like a hawk, but the human didn't dare make a move. The general's back was turned as she read the letter, her face betraying nothing. The human had seen enough of her to know that she was a woman of few words, but the way she held herself now, it was different. There was a coldness in her demeanor that hadn't been there before. The human couldn't help but wonder what had changed. Had the conspiracy reached her, or was she already part of it? A knock at the door interrupted the human's thoughts. The general turned quickly, her eyes sharp as she walked to answer it. The human stood frozen, unsure of what was going to happen next. When the door opened, a servant entered, looking nervous. "The Queen requests your presence, General," the servant said, bowing quickly before stepping aside. The general's eyes narrowed for a moment, then softened. She nodded and turned to the human. "You may leave now. I'll handle the rest." The human didn't argue. There was no point. They left the office quickly, walking back through the long corridors of the palace, their footsteps echoing off, the marble floors. They had learned more than they'd expected in such a short amount of time. The general's behavior had been strange, but now, the Queen's involvement in this bears. They had no real reason to be there, but it felt like the right place to be. The halls were quiet, too quiet. It wasn't long before they heard the sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable. The human ducked into a nearby alcove, holding their breath as the footsteps grew louder. It was the Queen. The human watched as she passed by, her regal stride as confident as ever. Her eyes were focused straight ahead, and for a moment the human could almost forget that she was in danger. But the feeling didn't last long. The human could sense the tension in the air, a weight that was invisible but real. The Queen stopped at the door to her chambers and turned slightly, as though sensing something. The human's heart skipped a beat. Were they going to be caught? But then, the Queen turned and entered her chambers without a second glance. The human exhaled slowly, their hearts still racing. That was too close. They couldn't afford to keep doing this. They needed to find a way to get the Queen alone, to warn her about the danger that was closing in around her. The human retreated to a quiet corner of the palace, their mind working overtime. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but they still didn't know who was behind it all. The Queen's advisors, the cloaked figure, the strange behavior of the general. It was all connected, but how? The next day, the human was asked to deliver a message to the Queen herself. This was their chance. They had to be careful, though. If the Queen saw them as just another servant, their words would mean nothing. They had to make her understand the gravity of the situation. The human arrived at the Queen's private chambers and knocked softly on the door. It was opened by one of the Queen's aides who stepped aside to let them in. "Her Majesty is expecting you," the aide said, giving the human a polite nod. The human entered the room, the Queen seated at her desk, her back to them as she looked over reports. The room was richly furnished, with tapestries from distant worlds hanging on the walls. The human hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach the Queen. "Your Majesty?" the human said softly, bowing respectfully. The Queen turned her, gazed to the human, her eyes scanning them with a hint of curiosity. "You're the Earthling," she said, her voice distant but not unkind. "What is it you wish to tell me?" The human took a deep breath. "There is a conspiracy within the palace, Your Majesty. Your life is in danger, and I believe the people you trust the most are the ones plotting against you." The Queen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the human feared they had made a mistake. But then the Queen spoke, her voice calm yet commanding. "Tell me everything," she ordered, and with that, the human began to speak, revealing everything they had learned. The Queen listened intently, her expression unreadable, but her eyes never left the human's face. The Queen's silence was deafening as the human finished speaking. The room was filled with an eerie calm, and for a moment, the human feared they had made a mistake. The Queen didn't respond right away, her eyes fixed on the human with an intensity that sent a shiver down their spine. For a long moment, nothing moved. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. The human stood perfectly still, unsure of what to expect. Had they just made things worse? Or had they finally convinced the Queen that the danger was real? Finally, the Queen spoke, her voice cold and controlled. "You're suggesting that there is a conspiracy against me. You're suggesting that my most trusted advisors, the very people I've worked with for years, are plotting behind my back." The human nodded, their voice steady. "Yes, Your Majesty. It's the truth. I've seen the signs. There are factions within the palace. People who want your throne." The Queen's eyes narrowed, but her expression remained unreadable. She stood up slowly, her regal presence filling the room. "I've known something was wrong for some time. I've seen the strange behavior, the quiet whispers in the hallways. But I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe that my people were loyal." The human could sense the weight of her words. The Queen had always been strong, powerful, the kind of ruler who commanded respect without saying a word. Yet now there was a vulnerability to her, a crack in the armor that the human had never seen before. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice low. "You're a servant, a foreigner. You've been in this palace for a short time. How can I know that you aren't part of this conspiracy yourself?" The human didn't hesitate. "I understand your doubt, Your Majesty. I've been nothing more than a servant, but I've seen enough to know that the people who want to take your throne will stop at nothing to do so. They've been using the palace to hide their true intentions. I've only been gathering information to protect you." The Queen studied the human for a moment, her gaze piercing. She seemed to weigh the human's words carefully, considering them with a level of thoughtfulness the human hadn't expected. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer now, almost resigned. "Perhaps you're right," she said. "Perhaps I've been too blind to see it. But if you're telling the truth, then the danger is greater than I thought. I need to know who is behind this." The human took a step forward, their heart racing. "I believe the general knows more than she's letting on. I've seen her meet with certain officials, people with questionable loyalty. She's been acting strangely, and I think she's involved in the conspiracy." The Queen's face hardened at the mention of the general. "The general is one of my most trusted commanders. She has been by my side for years. I cannot believe that she would betray me." The human didn't flinch. "I understand, Your Majesty, but I've seen enough to know that the general has been working with people who want to bring you down. You have to be careful. The people closest to you might not be who you think they are." The queen paused, her eyes focused on the floor as she thought deeply about the human's words. It was clear that this was a turning point for her. The realization that those around her, the very people she trusted most, might be conspiring against her was a bitter pill to swallow. After a long silence, the queen finally spoke. "You've given me much to think about. I will take your warning seriously, but I cannot act on this without proof. I will need evidence to confront the general and those who are involved." The human nodded. "I understand, Your Majesty. But time is running out. If we don't act quickly, the conspiracy could grow too powerful to stop." The queen stood up, her posture once again strong and commanding. "Then we will move quickly. I will start by questioning my most trusted allies, and I will keep an eye on the general. But I'll need your help. I can't do this alone." The human's heart raced as they realized what the queen was asking. She was trusting them, giving them a role in something far bigger than they had ever imagined. "I will help you, Your Majesty. I'll do whatever it takes." The queen nodded, her expression softened for just a moment. "I will have the palace's guards watch the general closely. We need to find out where her loyalties truly lie." With that, the queen turned to leave the room, her commanding presence once again filling the space. The humans stayed where they were, watching her go. They had come to this palace as a servant, someone overlooked and underestimated. But now, they were part of something far more important. They had gained the queen's trust, and in doing so, had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth behind the conspiracy. The human knew that they couldn't afford to waste any time. The sea. Pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place, but the danger was still very real. The conspirators were out there, watching, waiting for their chance to strike. The human had to be careful, but now they had a queen who believed in them, and together they would find a way to expose the traitors and save the throne. But the road ahead would not be easy. There would be lies, betrayal, and danger at every turn. The human had no idea where this path would lead, but they knew one thing for certain. They could never go back to being just a servant again. They were part of something far greater now, and they would fight for it, no matter the cost. The tension in the palace had reached a boiling point. With the queen now aware of the conspiracy swirling within her court, every day felt like a countdown. The human had been drawn into a game they never intended to play. But now that they were here, they couldn't stop. There was too much at stake. Too many lives depended on them uncovering the truth. The queen had begun to take action, discreetly questioning those she once trusted. The human had been assigned to observe the general's every move. It wasn't easy. The general had grown, more guarded, more secretive, and it seemed like she knew that someone was watching her. Every time the human passed by her office, the general's eyes followed them with a calculating look, as if she could sense the danger closing in. One evening, as the human made their rounds, they overheard a conversation in one of the palace's lesser-known corridors. Two guards were speaking in hushed tones, their words laced with fear. "The general's meeting with someone tonight," one guard whispered. "She's been acting strange lately. I don't like it." "You think she's involved in it?" the other asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know, but I wouldn't put it past her. If she's really been planning against the queen, it's only a matter of time before she makes her move." The human froze, listening closely. Their heart raced. The general was meeting someone, perhaps another conspirator. This could be the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The human had to act fast. They couldn't let this opportunity slip by. The next day, the human reported the conversation to the queen's trusted aide, a woman named Lyra. The human had grown to trust Lyra over the past few weeks. She was one of the few people in the palace who still seemed loyal to the queen. The human had worked with her on several occasions and knew she would take the warning seriously. "We can't wait any longer," Lyra said quietly after listening to the human's report. "I'll inform the queen, but we need to be prepared. If the general is planning something, she could have allies inside the palace. We need to act fast." The human nodded. The situation was becoming more dangerous by the day, but the queen's safety was paramount. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Lyra instructed the human to follow the general's movements, to continue observing her and reporting back any new information. It was a risky task, but the human had no choice. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. That night, the human slipped through the palace halls, keeping to the shadows. The general's office was just up ahead, and from there, the human could see the faint glow of light under the door. The meeting was about to begin. The human crouched low, moving quietly so as not to attract attention. They pressed themselves against the cold stone walls of the corridor, their heart pounding in their chest. They had to get closer. Through a narrow gap in the door, the human could see the general standing beside a tall figure cloaked in dark robes. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but the human could feel the danger radiating from them. There was no doubt that this person was involved in the conspiracy. But who were they? The human's pulse quickened as they strained to hear the conversation. "We're ready," the cloaked figure said in a low, gravelly voice. "The time to strike is now. The queen has no idea what's coming." The general nodded. "We can't wait any longer. The queen is too powerful. We need to move before she realizes what we're doing." The human's mind raced. This was it. The queen's life was in immediate danger. The general and her mysterious ally were preparing to strike. They had to warn the queen, but how? The human backed away slowly, retreating into the shadows. They couldn't risk being seen. As they made their way back through the halls, their thoughts raced. The situation was more urgent than ever. The general was no longer just a suspect. She was actively plotting against the queen, and the human was the only one who knew. They had to get to the queen, but they had to be careful. The palace was full of spies, and one wrong move could ruin everything. The human made their way to the queen's chambers, hoping against hope that they would make it in time. The queen was sitting at her desk when the human arrived, her back turned as she went over some reports. For a moment, the human hesitated, unsure of how to present the news. But they couldn't wait. The threat was real, and the queen needed to know now. "Your Majesty," the human said quietly, bowing as they entered. "The general is planning something. She's meeting with someone tonight, someone who's part of the conspiracy. They're preparing to strike against you." The queen turned to face them, her expression unreadable. "Are you sure of this?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. "I overheard them speaking, Your Majesty. They're moving against you. They want to take control of the palace." The queen's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, the human saw a flicker of fear in her gaze. But it was quickly replaced by resolve. The queen stood up, her posture straight and strong, the weight of the crown settling on her shoulders once more. "We must act swiftly," she said. "Lyra, gather the guards. We'll need to move, quickly, but we must be strategic. We cannot afford to let them make the first move." The human nodded, relief washing over them. Finally, the queen was taking action, but the road ahead would not be easy. There were still traitors in the palace, and the general was one of the most dangerous among them. As the human left the queen's chambers, they knew the next few hours would be critical. The conspiracy was coming to a head, and the queen's survival depended on them all staying one step ahead of the traitors. The human had no idea how this would end, but they were ready to fight for the queen. The traitors didn't slip through their fingers. The queen's private chambers were bustling with activity as they prepared for the confrontation. The human was placed in charge of keeping watch over the eastern corridor, where the general's office was located. From here, they could see if anyone tried to approach or flee. It was a perfect vantage point, but also the most dangerous. If the general realized what was happening, they would have no time to react. Hours passed, and the human's nerves began to wear thin. Every sound in the halls felt louder than it was. Footsteps echoed, doors creaked, and every time someone passed by, the human's heart skipped a beat. They had to remain focused. The queen was depending on them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a signal came. One of the palace guards arrived at the human's position with urgent news. "They've moved," the guard said, his voice tense. "The general and the cloaked figure are heading toward the west wing. We think they're trying to escape." The human's stomach dropped. The general was making a run for it. The plot was unraveling faster than they had hoped. There was no time to waste. The human nodded, acknowledging the urgency, and signaled to the guard to move forward. They quickly made their way to the west wing, trying to stay out of sight. As they neared the entrance, the human could see the general and the mysterious figure ahead, talking in hushed tones. The cloaked figure's face was still hidden, but the human could feel the danger radiating from them. This was the moment. The human moved quickly, staying low to the ground, trying to stay out of their line of sight. The queen's forces were only moments away, and the general's escape had to be stopped. But there was something else in the air, a feeling of dread. The human couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. Were they walking into a trap? A loud voice broke the silence, making the human freeze. "Stop right there!" It was Lyra's voice, sharp and commanding. The human turned to see Lyra and several guards approaching from the opposite direction. The general had no way to escape now, but instead of running, the general stood still, as if waiting for something. The cloaked figure turned slowly to face the oncoming group, a twisted smile appearing on their hidden face. "So you finally figured it out," the figure said, their voice cold and mocking. "How predictable." The human's heart raced. This was it, the final confrontation. They had no idea who this person was, but they knew one thing for sure. They were the key to everything. The queen's forces surrounded the general and the cloaked figure, their weapons drawn. The human could feel the tension in the air as the two conspirators exchanged a glance. They had been caught, but the human had a feeling they weren't going to go down without a fight. The general stepped forward, her posture stiff and defiant. "You don't know what you're meddling with," she said, her voice low. "This is bigger than you. We were going to free this galaxy from the Queen's rule, and you've ruined it." The cloaked figure laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You, fool. You think the Queen is the problem? It's the system, the corruption, the endless struggle for power. You're just a pawn in a game you don't understand." The human stepped forward, their voice steady. "You're wrong. The cool. Een is the protector of this kingdom, and you're trying to tear it down for your own gain." The general's eyes flashed with anger. "You've no idea what's at stake. You can't see the bigger picture. We were going to create a new order, one without the Queen's iron grip. We were going to fix this broken system." The human knew better. They had seen enough of the palace's politics, the lies, and betrayal. There was no new order. There was only power, and those who were willing to do anything to take it. "I won't let you destroy everything the Queen has worked for," the human said, their voice strong. They took a step toward the general, knowing that this was the moment they had been working for. Without warning, the cloaked figure moved quickly, pulling a weapon from beneath their cloak and aiming it directly at the human. The human's instincts kicked in. They ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. The sound of energy weapons filled the air as the Queen's guards engaged the conspirators. The human pushed forward, their mind focused on one thing: stopping the general. They couldn't let her get away. This was the moment that would decide everything. The general made a move, but before she could react, the human lunged, tackling her to the ground. The two struggled for a moment, the human using every bit of strength they had. The general was strong, but the human had something she didn't: determination. In one swift motion, the human disarmed the general and pinned her to the ground, holding her arms behind her back. The battle was over. The cloaked figure, seeing their ally defeated, hesitated for a moment before disappearing into the shadows, leaving the palace guards to deal with them. The general was taken into custody, her plans thwarted, and the queen's throne was safe once more. As the dust settled, the human stood tall, watching the queen approach. She had been silent throughout the confrontation, but now she nodded in approval. "You did well," the queen said quietly. "You saved my throne." The human could only nod in return. They had done what they set out to do. They had protected the queen, exposed the traitors, and stopped a rebellion that could have torn the entire kingdom apart. But more than that, they had proved that even a simple servant could change the fate of an empire. The tension in the palace had finally lifted, but the aftermath of the betrayal was still heavy. The human stood in the queen's private chambers, watching as the queen looked over the documents, her face unreadable. The general, now under lock and key, was no longer a threat, but the question still lingered. How had everything come to this? The palace was recovering, but there were still whispers. It would take time for the wounds to heal and for the queen's authority to be fully restored. The conspirators had been exposed, but many remained loyal to the queen, and others, once loyal to the traitors, were still uncertain where to place their trust. The human had done their part. They had uncovered the plot, stopped the traitors, and saved the queen's throne. It had all happened so quickly. Just days ago, they had been a servant, barely noticed among the thousands who passed through the palace. Now, they were something more. They had earned the queen's trust, proved themselves capable of far more than anyone had imagined. The queen looked up from the documents and met the human's gaze. "I owe you everything," she said, her voice steady but filled with a gratitude that couldn't be ignored. "Without you, this palace would have fallen." The human nodded, their mind still racing with everything that had happened. They hadn't done it for glory or praise. They had done it because it was the right thing to do. The queen's life, her rule, and the future of the empire had been in their hands. They had no choice but to act. "I only did what needed to be done, Your Majesty," the human replied quietly. "Your safety was more important than anything else." The queen smiled, a small but genuine gesture. "Still, I want to thank you properly. You've earned more than the title of servant. I won't forget what you've done for me." The human was silent for a moment, the weight of the queen's words sinking in. What did this mean? The queen had offered them something more than they had ever expected. But what would it look like, this reward she spoke of? A higher position in the palace? A role of power? Before the human could speak, the queen continued. "I want you to stay here, by my side. You've proven yourself loyal, and I need people I can trust. You've seen the palace from the ground up, and you understand its dangers. I believe you can help me rebuild, make sure something like this never happens again." The human's heart raced. The queen was offering them a position of trust, of power. It was more than they had ever imagined, but it also meant a new responsibility, a new life, one where they would never again be just a servant. "I don't know what to say, Your Majesty," the human replied, their voice full of surprise. "I never expected this." The queen's gaze softened. "I didn't expect to need someone like you either, but in times like these, it's not always about the titles or the positions. It's about what someone is willing to do when it counts." The human stood silently for a moment, processing everything that had happened. They had come to the palace as a servant, but now they were being offered something more, something that would change their life forever. But the human wasn't sure if they were ready for it. They had only just proven that they could be trusted, that they had the ability to change the course of history. And yet there was a lingering doubt in their mind. Could they really live up to this new role? The queen seemed to sense the hesitation. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. You don't have to decide right now, but know this. You're more than just a servant to me. You've shown courage, loyalty, and a sharp mind. You have the potential to do so much more, and I would be honored to have you by my side. The human took a deep breath. They had faced so much: betrayal, danger, uncertainty. And yet, in the end, they had done what they had set out to do. They had helped save the queen, protect the throne, and expose the truth. They had made a difference. But now, with the opportunity to stand by the queen's side, the human couldn't help but wonder, what would this new life look like? It was more than just a position of power. It was a chance to shape the future, to have a hand in what came next for the empire. The human had already proven their loyalty, their worth. The queen trusted them. But was it enough for the human to embrace this new role, to take on the responsibility that came with it? As the silence stretched on, the human finally spoke. I'm honored by your offer, Your Majesty, and I accept. I will stay by your side and help rebuild this palace, this empire. Together, we'll make sure that what happened here never happens again. The queen smiled, her eyes filled with both gratitude and determination. Good. Together we will rebuild this kingdom, and we will make it stronger than ever. The human, now more certain than ever, stood tall. They had started this journey as an ordinary servant, but they had become so much more. They had helped save the queen, stopped a rebellion, and gained the queen's trust. They were no longer invisible, no longer just a servant. They were an ally, a protector, and a key player in the future of the kingdom. As the human left the queen's chambers, they knew that their life had changed forever. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they would fight to protect everything they had helped build. And so, the human's journey had just begun. They had proven that even the smallest of us could change the course of history. The path ahead would not be easy, but with the queen by their side, the human was ready for whatever came next.